She is still out there, and the device implanted inside her chest recorded what happened to her during the hours she vanished. Before going into what that device captured, it is worth taking a moment to explain what a modern implanted cardiac pacemaker actually is, because most people's understanding of these devices is incomplete, and that incomplete understanding is part of why the significance of this data has been misreported and misunderstood in the weeks since this case became public. The common understanding of a pacemaker is accurate as far as it goes. A pacemaker monitors the heart's electrical activity and delivers small electrical impulses to help maintain a regular, stable rhythm when the heart's natural rhythm becomes unreliable. That is what pacemakers are designed to do at the most fundamental level, and that function alone is medically significant. But that is only part of the picture when it comes to modern devices. Contemporary implanted cardiac devices are also continuous data recorders. Every heartbeat is logged, every instance of arrhythmia. Any deviation from the normal rhythm is logged with a precise timestamp. Every time the heart rate rises sharply above its normal range, that is logged. Every time it drops below normal, that is logged. Every significant change in cardiac behavior is captured, timestamped, and stored within the device's internal memory. Beyond cardiac data, many modern pacemakers also incorporate accelerometers. An accelerometer is a sensor that measures physical movement, specifically the character and pattern of movement. This is relevant because the pattern of movement a person produces when they are walking under their own power looks fundamentally different in accelerometer data than the pattern produced when a person is being physically carried or transported by someone else. Voluntary, self-directed movement has a specific rhythm to it, a cadence that reflects intentional physical effort. Passive movement, where the body is being moved by an external force, produces a different signature entirely. It is recognizable, it is distinguishable, and it is logged. Nancy's pacemaker had both of these capabilities, and it had one more. It was connected to a home monitoring base unit, a device plugged into the wall of her bedroom that communicated wirelessly with her implanted pacemaker and transmitted her cardiac data to the manufacturer's secure cloud platform at regular intervals, not once a day, continuously. The data being produced inside her chest was being relayed, in near real time, to an external server maintained by the manufacturer. That server became the center of the FBI's forensic investigation. Within the first week of February 2026, the FBI subpoenaed the manufacturer's cloud data records associated with Nancy's device. The manufacturer complied with the subpoena. FBI forensic cardiac specialists were assigned to analyze the data that came back. What they found inside that cloud record, inside those logged timestamps and cardiac signatures, is what this entire case now revolves around. To understand the evidence, the way investigators approached it, it helps to look at the case not as a collection of headlines, but as a structured file. There are 5 distinct evidence points that, taken together, build a picture that is extremely difficult to interpret as anything other than what investigators believe it to be. The first evidence point is the surveillance image. At 1:46 and 58 seconds in the morning of February 1st, 2026, the front door sensor at Nancy's residence detected motion. 4 seconds later, at 1:47:02, the doorbell camera began recording. 13 seconds after that, at 1:47:15, an unknown figure appeared on camera. The figure was dressed entirely in black. The build has been described as slim and athletic. The estimated height range is between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 2 inches. The figure was wearing gloves. The figure was carrying 2 bags. At 1:47:25, the figure left the camera frame. Moments later, the camera was disabled. The footage went dark. That is the last piece of external visual documentation from that property on the night Nancy disappeared. The second evidence point is what happened inside Nancy's chest at the exact same moment. At 1:47:18 in the morning, as that figure appeared on camera, Nancy's pacemaker logged a sudden and dramatic spike in heart rate. This was not the kind of gradual increase a person experiences when waking from sleep and slowly becoming alert. It was acute. It was immediate. Forensic cardiologists who have reviewed and analyzed this type of cardiac pattern have described it clearly in clinical literature. It is the physiological response of a conscious, aware person who experiences sudden and severe fright. The spike was sharp. It was instantaneous, and it occurred at the precise moment the masked figure appeared outside her door. The timing between these two data points, the camera recording the figure and the pacemaker logging the cardiac spike, is not a coincidence. Nancy's own heart confirmed what the camera had captured. Something happened at 1:47 in the morning, something that terrified her, and she was awake for it. The third evidence point is what the full digital forensics log produced when the doorbell camera's cloud backup and the pacemaker's cloud data were analyzed side by side. The timeline reads as follows. At 1:46:58, the front door sensor detects motion. At 1:47:02, the doorbell camera begins recording. At 1:47:15, the unknown figure appears on camera. At 1:47:18, the pacemaker logs a significant cardiac event. Heart rate spikes. Rhythm becomes irregular. At 1:47:20, audio analysis tools flagged an unusual sound event detected from inside the residence. At 1:47:25, the figure leaves the camera frame. The camera is disabled. Then, at 2:28 in the morning, the sync between Nancy's pacemaker and her home monitoring base unit stops. That is the final data point in the cloud record. Between 1:47 and 2:28, there is a 41-minute window. 41 minutes during which no camera was active, no phone record exists, no GPS signal has been reported. 41 minutes of complete external darkness. But during every second of those 41 minutes, the device inside Nancy's chest continued to record. The fourth evidence point is the physical evidence recovered in connection with the incident. The masked figure was carrying 2 bags and wearing gloves at 1:47 in the morning. Those 2 details, in combination with each other and with everything else captured on camera, are not consistent with a spontaneous or impulsive intrusion. Someone who arrives at a residential address in the early hours of the morning carrying 2 prepared bags and wearing gloves has come ready for something specific. The preparation was deliberate. The intent was formed before arrival. The fifth evidence point is the location itself. The Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. Quiet residential streets, low overnight traffic. The kind of neighborhood where a vehicle can arrive and depart in the early hours of the morning without drawing attention and without being observed by passing traffic or neighboring residences. The choice of that hour and that location, in combination with every other element of the evidence, reflects a level of environmental awareness that is not consistent with a random or unplanned event. Now go inside those 41 minutes, because this is where the pacemaker data becomes something more than a medical record. This is where it becomes testimony. The first thing the data establishes clearly is that Nancy was awake when this began. That detail matters more than it might initially seem. When a person is in deep sleep and is suddenly startled or disturbed, the cardiac response follows a specific pattern. There is a lag, a gradual escalation, as the body moves from a sleep state toward alertness. That is not what the pacemaker recorded. The spike at 1:47:18 was sudden and immediate. It is the response pattern of a person who is already conscious and alert, who encounters a threat in real time. Nancy was not asleep. She was awake. She was aware. And at the precise moment that masked figure appeared outside her front door, her heart responded to something she perceived as an immediate and serious threat. Her pacemaker recorded that response with a timestamp, and that timestamp aligns with the doorbell camera footage to within seconds. She knew something was wrong. Her body recorded that knowledge. The second phase of the 41-minute window is what the data shows in the minutes following that initial spike. In a standard startle or fright response, the kind a person experiences when hearing a loud, unexpected noise or being briefly frightened, the heart rate spikes and then returns to its baseline level within a few minutes. The nervous system recalibrates. The perceived threat passes. The body settles. That did not happen. Nancy's heart rate remained elevated for minutes. The rhythm data during this phase shows irregularities that forensic cardiologists associate with sustained extreme emotional distress, not a clinical emergency in the traditional sense, but a pattern that reflects a person whose body is in a prolonged state of acute fear, the kind of fear that does not resolve because the thing causing it has not gone away. This is not the data of a woman who heard something strange, checked her surroundings, found nothing, and returned to bed. This is the data of a woman who was in the continuous presence of something that terrified her, for an extended period of time, with no relief. Whatever came through or toward that door at 1:47 in the morning did not leave quickly. It stayed, and Nancy's cardiac record reflects that with clinical precision. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes into the 41-minute window, the data changes again. And this is the finding that investigators have approached most carefully when discussing the case in any public context. The accelerometer data shifts. During the first phase of the event, the accelerometer had been logging movement patterns consistent with a person in her own environment, the kind of small, localized physical activity a conscious and frightened person produces when they are stationary or moving in a limited space. Beginning at roughly 15 to 20 minutes into the window, that pattern changes entirely. The movement signature recorded by the accelerometer shifts from patterns consistent with voluntary, self-directed movement to patterns that are passive in character. The movement is no longer being generated by Nancy herself. The rhythm of it, the character of it, the sustained and continuous nature of it, all of it points toward a body being moved by an external force. Forensic analysis of this type of accelerometer data, passive movement signatures in implanted cardiac devices, has been applied in a small number of investigations and is an area of active development in digital forensic medicine. The pattern recorded in the data from this phase of the event is consistent with a person who has been placed in a vehicle and is being transported, not walking, not repositioning herself within a room, being carried, being moved, being taken somewhere by someone else. The final phase of the 41-minute window is the one the FBI's forensic cardiac team has described as the most clinically significant finding in the entire analysis. In the last 10 to 15 minutes before the sync between Nancy's pacemaker and her home monitoring unit stops at 2:28 in the morning, the cardiac data shows something specific, something with a precise clinical meaning. Heart rate variability, the natural slight beat-to-beat variation that exists in the heart rhythm of a conscious, aware person whose nervous system is actively regulating cardiac function, begins to decrease significantly. This is not a minor fluctuation or an artifact of data transmission. It is a measurable, sustained reduction in the complexity of the cardiac rhythm, and in a clinical context, it carries a specific interpretation. Decreased heart rate variability of this character, in this pattern, in this context, is associated with suppression of the central nervous system's normal regulatory influence on the heart. It is the cardiac signature of a person whose level of consciousness is being chemically altered. Medical and forensic literature on this subject, and there is a body of it, developed through both clinical cardiology and forensic investigation, describes this pattern in specific terms. The term applied by the FBI's forensic cardiac specialists to the data from this final phase is pharmacological sedation, a drug-induced alteration of consciousness. In the final minutes before her pacemaker lost contact with the outside world, a sedative appears to have been administered to Nancy Guthrie, possibly by injection, possibly by inhalation. The data does not specify the method. But what the data does show, with a degree of clinical clarity that has been reviewed and affirmed by forensic cardiologists, is that a substance was introduced to the body of an 84-year-old woman during those final minutes, and then the signal went dark. The sedation finding is not a secondary detail. It is the finding that most fundamentally redefines every other element of this case. Medical-grade sedating compounds capable of producing this type of rapid-onset cardiac signature. The specific pattern of heart rate variability reduction visible in the pacemaker data are not available over the counter. They are not the kind of substances a person stumbles across by accident or acquires through casual means. They are controlled substances. Their procurement leaves traces, prescription records, clinical connections, supply chain documentation, or, alternatively, black market acquisition pathways that themselves generate investigative trails. You do not arrive at an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night with a medical-grade sedative by accident. You plan for it. You obtain it with a specific purpose in mind. You bring it to that house because you intended to use it before you ever arrived. The sedation finding tells investigators three things with significant force. The first is that this was premeditated, not impulsive, not opportunistic. Someone thought about this, planned for this, and prepared for this far enough in advance to obtain a controlled substance and bring it to Nancy's residence with the intent to use it on her. The second is that whoever did this has some form of access to substances that are not casually available. That access, wherever it originated, leaves a trail. The procurement of medical-grade sedatives requires a connection to either a legitimate medical or clinical supply chain or an illicit procurement network. Either one can be investigated. Either one produces leads. The third is that the specific cardiac signature visible in the data is itself an investigative tool. Because different sedating compounds produce subtly different cardiac signatures, the pattern recorded in the pacemaker data narrows the range of compounds that could have produced it. Narrowing the compound narrows the investigation. The FBI's forensic cardiac team has been working with that information for months. The procurement trail, wherever it leads, is actively being followed. At 2:28 in the morning, the sync between Nancy's pacemaker and her home monitoring base unit stopped. In the weeks that followed the public emergence of this case, the timestamp was widely misreported. Multiple outlets described it as the moment Nancy's pacemaker stopped functioning, implying, and in some cases directly stating, that it represented evidence of her death. That reporting was factually incorrect, and the distinction matters enormously. The sync stopped. The wireless connection between the implanted device in Nancy's chest and the base unit on the wall of her bedroom was severed. The most straightforward explanation for that severance, and the one consistent with everything else the data shows, particularly the passive movement signature recorded in the preceding phase, is that Nancy had been moved far enough from her home that the pacemaker was no longer within range of the base unit's wireless receiver. The pacemaker itself did not stop. The device inside her chest continued to function. It continued to regulate. It continued to record. The window to the outside world closed, but the recording did not end. Somewhere beyond the reach of that base unit, in a vehicle, on a road, moving away from the Catalina foothills, the device kept running. It kept logging. It kept time-stamping everything her body experienced. The record simply stopped reaching anyone who could read it. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. She has been missing for more than 90 days. The FBI investigation is active. The pacemaker data has been analyzed. The procurement trail for the sedative is being pursued. The forensic work continues. And somewhere, still unknown, still unresolved, is an 84-year-old woman whose heart has been beating through all of it. A woman who raised her children, tended her garden, sat on her porch in the evening quiet of the Catalina foothills, and whose body became, on the night of February 1st, 2026, the only witness to what was done to her. Her pacemaker said everything it could say. It logged every second. It transmitted every beat. It recorded a fear response, a sustained state of terror, a passive movement consistent with being taken from her own home, and the unmistakable cardiac signature of a sedative introduced into her system by someone who came prepared to do exactly that. The data is there. The investigation is ongoing, and Nancy is still out there. If this case matters to you, And it should. Make sure you are subscribed to True Crime Vic so you do not miss it when it drops. Hit the like button on this video. It helps this channel continue covering cases like this one the way they deserve to be covered, with precision, with care, and with complete respect for the people at the center of them. Nancy Guthrie deserves that. Her family deserves that. And the truth, wherever it leads, deserves to be followed all the way to the end. The first thing that needs to be stated clearly, because it was misreported widely enough that the confusion became part of the public narrative, is what exactly stopped at 2:28 in the morning. The sync stopped. The wireless connection between the implanted pacemaker inside Nancy's chest and the home monitoring base unit sitting on the wall of her bedroom was broken at 2:28. That is what the data shows. That is the accurate and complete description of what happened at that timestamp. Nancy's pacemaker did not stop. Her heart did not stop. What the data shows at 2008 is a sedated but functioning cardiac rhythm, not the signature of cardiac arrest, not the device entering any kind of post-mortem mode, not the physiological pattern associated with death. The heart, recorded at that final moment, was still beating, altered by the sedative introduced in those preceding minutes, yes, but beating, functioning, alive. The most likely explanation for why the sync severed at that moment is straightforward when read against everything else the data had already established. The accelerometer had logged passive movement consistent with vehicle transport, beginning approximately 15 to 20 minutes into the 41-minute window. A vehicle traveling away from Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills for 15 to 20 minutes would have placed her well beyond the wireless transmission range of the base unit in her bedroom. The signal simply could not reach that far. The alternative explanation, that someone entered the home and manually disabled the base unit, is also possible, and investigators have not ruled it out. But either way, the conclusion is the same. The recording window closed because the connection was severed, not because the heart stopped. Nancy Guthrie was almost certainly alive at 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, 2026. That is not wishful thinking. That is what the medical data says. On April 6th, 2026, day 65 of the investigation, 2 notes arrived at TMZ. Both were sent by the same person. Both arrived on the same morning. The first note claimed that Nancy Guthrie was dead. The second note, sent within hours of the first, claimed that the sender had seen Nancy alive in Sonora, Mexico. 2 notes, same sender, same morning, directly contradicting each other. Retired FBI agents who reviewed the notes publicly described them as fraudulent. The contradiction between them alone is enough to disqualify both from serious evidentiary consideration. A person with genuine knowledge of Nancy's situation would not simultaneously claim she was dead and claim to have seen her alive in Mexico within the same morning. But the pacemaker data adds a layer of refutation to the death claim that goes beyond the logical contradiction between the 2 notes. The data at 2:28 does not show cardiac arrest. It does not show the device entering any mode associated with the cessation of cardiac function. It shows a sedated but beating heart. Whoever wrote the note claiming Nancy was dead was not working from any knowledge of what the pacemaker recorded. They did not have access to the clinical data. They were guessing, and their guess is directly contradicted by the most medically rigorous evidence in this entire investigation. The TMZ notes were a distraction. The pacemaker data is not. In mid-April 2026, investigators announced a development that most coverage treated as a separate thread from the pacemaker story. It is not a separate thread. It connects directly to everything the cardiac data had already established about what happened inside Nancy's home that night. DNA evidence recovered from Nancy's residence was sent to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. 2 specific items, a rootless hair sample, and biological material recovered from a bedsheet clipping. Rootless hair presents a significant analytical challenge. Traditional DNA analysis relies on the root of a hair follicle, the biological material attached at the base, because that is where the nuclear DNA is most accessible and most complete. A rootless hair shaft contains mitochondrial DNA, which is far more limited in the information it can yield, and trace amounts of cellular material that require highly specialized extraction techniques to work with productively. The FBI did not send this evidence to a standard forensic lab. They partnered with Astria Forensics, a California-based laboratory that specializes in low copy number DNA analysis and touch DNA. Two methodologies developed specifically to extract usable genetic profiles from biological material that conventional analysis cannot process. Low copy number analysis amplifies trace genetic material that exists in quantities far too small for standard methods. Touch DNA analysis works with the microscopic cellular deposits left by physical contact, the kind of material left behind when someone handles a surface, a fabric, an object. The forensic genealogist attached to this analysis is Say C. Moore, one of the most recognized figures in the field of investigative genetic genealogy in the United States. Moore's methodology has produced identifications in cases where biological evidence was degraded, partial, or decades old. Her work contributed to the identification of suspects in cold cases that had sat unresolved for 30 and 40 years. She is not brought into an investigation to produce inconclusive results. The combination of Astria Forensics extraction technology and Moore's genealogical analysis methodology means that even a partial, degraded DNA profile from that rootless hair sample carries genuine investigative potential. Because genetic genealogy does not require a direct match in a criminal database, it requires a match to a biological relative, anyone who shares enough of that DNA profile to indicate a family connection. Once a relative is identified through a public genealogy database, investigators can build a family tree forward to identify who, within that biological family, could have been present in Nancy's home on the night she disappeared. That methodology has produced convictions. It is not theoretical. It works. There is a part of this investigation that has not received the critical attention it deserves, and it should, because it is one of the reasons this case did not move as quickly as it should have from the beginning. Early in the investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Office sent a DNA sample from Nancy's home to a laboratory in Florida, not to Quantica, not to the FBI's specialized forensic units, with the capabilities most relevant to this type of evidence, to a state-level lab in Florida. When a reporter asked the Pima County Sheriff directly about this during a live television appearance, he confirmed the DNA had gone to Florida. The FBI had already stated publicly that the DNA was being sent to Quantica. Two different answers, two different labs, two different institutional accounts of where critical biological evidence from an active federal missing persons investigation had been routed. That contradiction surfaced publicly and immediately generated serious questions about the coordination between local and federal investigators working this case. Jurisdictional friction between local law enforcement agencies and federal investigative bodies is not unusual in high-profile cases. Both institutions operate under different chains of command, different procedural frameworks, and, often, different priorities about who controls the direction of an investigation. That friction is a known and documented challenge in joint federal-local cases. But in a case involving a missing 80% 4-year-old woman, where the biological evidence recovered from her home may be the most direct path to identifying who took her, routing that evidence to a less specialized lab and creating confusion about where it actually went does not just generate administrative problems. It costs time. And in a case like this, time is not an abstract resource. It is the difference between outcomes. The DNA eventually reached Quantica, but the path it took to get there, and the public confusion that path created, represented a failure in evidence handling that investigators will be accountable for. On May 6, 2026, a special television program titled The Nancy Guthrie Mystery aired on the CW network. 3 experts appeared together on camera, individuals whose collective credentials in American criminal investigation represent decades of field experience and academic research. Dr. Ann Burgess is a criminal profiler whose foundational work with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit helped establish the modern framework for criminal profiling. Her research and methods were the basis for the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Braccato is a forensic psychologist at Boston College and co-author of peer-reviewed research on targeted violence and the psychology of perpetrators in planned criminal acts. Dr. Casey Jordan is a criminologist and behavioral analyst whose work focuses on the behavioral signatures of premeditated crime. All three reached the same conclusion independently. The individual investigators have referred to publicly as Porch Guy, the masked figure captured on the doorbell camera approaching Nancy's home at 1:47 in the morning, may already be dead, eliminated by the person who directed the operation. The person these experts collectively referred to as the boss. Read that against the pacemaker data and the physical evidence, and what it tells you is this: the figure on camera came in through the front. He disabled the camera. He entered the home. He was a participant in what happened to Nancy that night. But he was not the architect. Someone else planned the timing of the approach. Someone else knew the layout of the camera system well enough to disable it. Someone else obtained the sedative, a controlled substance that required either a medical or clinical connection or a deliberate procurement through illicit channels. Someone else had a vehicle positioned and waiting. Someone else decided when this would happen, how it would happen, and what would happen to the person who carried it out when it was over. If the boss has already moved to eliminate the individual who made direct contact with Nancy's home, to cut the one link that could connect the operation back to its source, that decision is not impulsive. It is calculated. It reflects a mind that is not reacting to circumstances, but managing them, planning consequences, removing exposure points. A person who responds to the aftermath of a crime of this nature by eliminating a participant rather than fleeing is a person who either has experience executing operations of this complexity or who planned every contingency before the first step was ever taken. That is the profile at the center of this investigation, and that is who the FBI is working toward. Within the first days of the investigation, the FBI deployed signal detection equipment around the Tucson area. These devices, designed to detect the specific low-power Bluetooth signal that Nancy's pacemaker emits, were positioned with a specific geographic purpose. Modern implanted cardiac pacemakers broadcast a short-range Bluetooth signal that is designed to communicate with a compatible monitoring unit or clinical programming device when one is nearby. The effective range of this signal under realistic conditions is approximately 15 to 30 feet. That is a short range. It means that to detect the signal, investigators need to be in the correct geographic area and within that limited physical proximity to Nancy herself. That is a significant practical challenge in a search covering any meaningful geographic area. But the pacemaker data had already produced a constraint that made the challenge more tractable. The accelerometer data from the 41-minute window indicated that Nancy had been in a moving vehicle for approximately 15 to 20 minutes before the sync severed at 2:28. 15 to 20 minutes of vehicle travel from her residence in the Catalina foothills at highway speeds consistent with the movement data places a vehicle anywhere from 12 to 25 miles from her home in any direction. That geographic radius became the primary operational zone for the Bluetooth detection effort. When that radius is overlaid on a map of the Tucson area, the highway corridor running south toward Rio Rico and toward the border with Mexico falls directly within it. Investigators are aware of that geographic alignment. It has shaped the direction of the search. The Bluetooth detection sweeps are not a guarantee. The range limitations of the signal make this a methodologically demanding effort, but it is an active investigative tool, informed by data that the pacemaker itself produced, and it continues. Across the span of this investigation, a series of errors and complications compounded in ways that slowed the case's momentum. They deserve to be named honestly, because honest accounting of where an investigation went wrong is part of understanding why it has not yet reached resolution. The DNA routing confusion, sending the biological sample to a Florida state lab rather than directly to Quantico cost weeks of analysis time that an investigation of this urgency could not afford to lose. On multiple occasions, details about the Bluetooth detection effort were disclosed publicly. If the individuals responsible for Nancy's disappearance have any degree of technical awareness, and the level of planning evident in every other aspect of what the Pacemaker data documents suggests they do, knowing that a Bluetooth signal sweep is being conducted tells them exactly what to avoid. Keep Nancy away from any clinical device, any monitoring unit, any hospital setting where a programmer might come within range of her pacemaker. A disclosure of that kind is not just a procedural error, it is a communication to the people who took her. When the fraudulent TMZ notes arrived on April 6th, the public response from investigators and commentators confirmed to anyone paying close attention what was being taken seriously and what was being dismissed. Every public statement about investigative priorities and credibility thresholds is simultaneously a signal to whoever committed this crime about what they need to continue concealing and what they have successfully obscured. The jurisdictional friction between the Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI over evidence handling created confusion and delay at a point in the investigation when clarity and speed were most critical. And in the earliest hours and days after Nancy's disappearance was reported, the geographic search focused on the immediate area around her home before the accelerometer data had been fully decoded and operationalized into search parameters. The data that eventually pointed toward a 12 to 25-mile radius was not acting on the investigation fast enough to shape those initial efforts. Each of these errors, considered on its own, is understandable. Investigations are complex. Agencies have competing procedures. Evidence handling across jurisdictions creates friction by default. But together, these failures formed a pattern of delay in a case where the passage of time works against finding Nancy Guthrie alive. There is an obligation to be honest about what this evidence cannot tell us, because this case deserves precision more than it deserves the kind of certainty that the evidence does not actually support. The Pacemaker cloud data establishes what happened to Nancy between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning of February 1st. It does not tell us where she is now. The internal logs of the device, the data recorded after the sync severed at 2:28, are still inside the pacemaker, still inside Nancy, and they can only be accessed when she is found. The device does not have GPS capability. The Bluetooth signal it emits is a short-range clinical tool, not a tracking beacon. More than 90 days have passed since that last recorded data point. But here is what the data does say, without ambiguity, without speculation, stated in the clinical terms of the forensic cardiac analysis itself. At 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie's heart was beating. Her pacemaker was functioning. The cardiac pattern recorded at that final moment was the pattern of a living person under pharmacological sedation, not the pattern of cardiac arrest, not the pattern of death. Nancy was alive at 2:28 in the morning, and until evidence conclusively demonstrates otherwise, that is the foundation from which investigators are working. There is something that sits at the center of this case that transcends the forensic analysis and the investigative timeline, something that becomes more significant the longer this case remains open. The pacemaker inside Nancy Guthrie's chest has been running continuously since the night she disappeared. Every day that has passed, every hour, every minute, the device has been logging, time-stamping, and recording. It cannot transmit anymore. The home monitoring base unit it was paired with sits in an empty bedroom in Tucson, receiving nothing. But the internal memory of that implanted device holds a complete physiological record of everything Nancy's body has experienced since 2:28 on February 1st, 2026. Every moment her heart rate elevated with fear, every moment it settled toward rest, every physiological signal her body has produced across more than 90 days. It is all there, stored inside a device the size of a small matchbox, implanted inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman who had dinner with her daughter, was driven home, went inside her house, and has not been seen since. The FBI's forensic cardiac team found a deeply disturbing pattern in the data they were able to access. But the complete record, the full truth of everything Nancy has experienced since that night, is still inside her, and the only way to read it is to bring her home. The DNA at Quantico is being processed right now through probabilistic genotyping and genetic genealogy methodology. C.C. Moore and Astrea Forensics have a documented record of producing results from material that other methods cannot process. The Bluetooth detection sweeps continue across the geographic radius established by the vehicle movement data. The procurement trail for the sedating compound identified in the pacemaker's cardiac signature remains an active investigative thread. The identity of the individual who planned this, obtained the controlled substance, positioned the vehicle, and may have already eliminated the person who made direct contact with Nancy's home that night. That identity is the central target of the entire federal investigation. FBI Director Kash Patel used the word nefarious when speaking about this case. He said directly that if investigators find nefarious conduct or conspiracy, they will make the appropriate arrests. The FBI does not apply that word to a case in a public statement without having already developed reason to believe it fits. The pacemaker data gave investigators the timeline of what happened to Nancy Guthrie between 1:47 and 2:28 on the morning of February 1st, 2026. The DNA at Quantico may give them a name. The Bluetooth sweeps may give them a location. The procurement trail may give them a network. And the device still running inside Nancy's chest is keeping a record of every second that passes until someone finds her. She is 84 years old. She raised her children on her own. She tended her garden. She attended her church. She had dinner with her daughter on a January evening and went home. And she deserves to come back from wherever she has been taken. The investigation is active. The threads are live, and this case is not over. If you have followed this coverage from the beginning, you already know that True Crime Vic covers these cases the way they deserve to be covered, with precision, with patience, and with complete respect for the people at the center of them. Nancy Guthrie is not a news cycle. She is not a content opportunity. She is a woman who is still missing, and her story will be followed here for as long as it takes to reach resolution. Subscribe to True Crime Vic right now if you are not already. When the next development in this case breaks, and it will break, you need to already be here. Hit the like button on this video. It helps this channel continue doing this work at the level this case demands. The next update is coming, and when it does, this is where you will find it covered the right way.